Hello again, and meditating on our inheritance. We inherit the future. And because we inherit the future, we can live now with a certain amount of anticipation. And that means more than just looking forward with longing. It means living now in the light of our future. Now, not every Christian thinks this way. Some people are very matter of fact and practical, and they claim that thinking about the new heaven and the new earth has very little to do with daily life. But I don't agree. I think that if you just think the present is all that matters, you are going to be blinkered. You will be trying to improve life, but perhaps without any model of what life ought to be like. Some people think we should invest all our hopes and all our energies in this world and let God look after the next world. I don't think that. And I'm going to start by telling a story. Summer 1973, I'm on the Scottish island of Iona, and I met a couple of really nice young Scottish guys from a Pentecostal church. And they were very keen on the healing ministry that they exercise in the Pentecostal churches, or they did in those days. What was interesting is that one of them had a number of very serious medical conditions. He was handicapped. I'm not sure if it was cerebral palsy and a couple of other things, or whether it was a more exotic problem. But eventually, after we'd become friends for a few days, I screwed up my courage and I said, well, look, Alistair, you talk about the healing ministry. What about your own conditions? Well, obviously he'd had that question before, and his answer was quite interesting. He was fully aware of the irony of a man with various long-term conditions being involved in a prayer ministry for healing other people. But he said that he had no confidence that it was right for himself to pray for healing. And because he didn't think it was right, or he didn't feel right doing it, he didn't. And the way he put it was, he felt that he had to accept his limitations. He had to be content that in the resurrection, in the world to come, he would have a body that did what he wanted it to, rather more than his current body. I thought that was quite wise. He was anticipating his freedom, in other words. As I say, the resurrection is about freedom. It's not about being in an inflexible kingdom. It's about sharing, inheriting a kingdom. And he was anticipating his future freedom, and therefore to some extent enjoying his freedom in advance, even though you could argue that he was quite constrained. If he wanted to travel any distance, he had to get his friends to help him with the wheelchair. And I've since come to realise, of course, that we're all very limited, aren't we? We're all limited in terms of what is possible for us. We have circumstances, of course, which put big limits on our lives, and sometimes physical limitations. And one of the annoyances of getting older is that the physical limitations tend to increase rather than diminish. So really, my young friend Alistair, I'm afraid I've lost touch with him now, but he was wise. He said, look, I know I've got limitations, and I know I shall be free of those limitations one day, and that's good enough for me. In the meantime, if I can pray for people to be healed, and they will be, I will do it. And yeah, he was a man at peace with his situation. Now, as I said, we're all limited in so many ways, and I think there's a lot of nonsense spoken in the modern world about human potential. People will say you can do anything you really want to if you put your mind to it. That's not true. It is true that you should be enthusiastic, you should be ambitious for yourself to some extent. But if you tell your children that they can achieve anything they want, those children are going to grow up frustrated and disappointed. They might even grow up as narcissists, thinking that the world exists to fulfill their expectations. There's an urban myth, isn't there, that we only use a tiny part of our brains. It's just not true. Parts of our brains are there to simply maintain and support the bits that are working hard. And so we don't want to get into nonsense about human potential. It is limited. We have real capabilities given to us by God. We need to avoid certainly being defeatist and pessimistic, but the wise person does well to own up to his limitations. And that Scots young man, Alistair, was just a very concrete example of a man who was at peace, really, or at home at least, with his limitations. But that keen sense of the future that he had changed his view of life. And he was a hopeful guy. We had some really happy conversations, he and myself and one or two others, during that week. And yet, I know many people who have an awful lot more than Alistair had, who seem to carry around a sense of disappointment all the time. And sometimes they blame someone for their disappointment. Sometimes they blame themselves, sometimes it's other people, sometimes it's the system or just bad luck. And I've come across far too many people who think things used to be better when they were children, or things used to be better when they were younger, which is a tremendously unwise way of thinking. Here's what Ecclesiastes 7:10 says. This is one of my favourite quotations. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. So it turns out that 300 or 400 BC, nostalgia was a problem. Now, if nostalgia was a problem 2,500 years ago, well, it's a problem today, isn't it? But where does nostalgia come from? It comes from a lack of hope. It means believing that what has gone is better than what's going to come in the future. And that is just wrong for a Christian. We know that the future is going to be better than the past. So we don't look back, we look forward. As the Apostle Paul says somewhere, we forget what is behind and we press on. And for the Christian, the best is yet to come. That's the point. So if you have a limitation, you can look forward to that limitation being eased or removed in the future that God has for you. Of course, for us, even death, which for so many people is a frightening terminus, for us death is nothing that we should worry about too much. When we die, we rest, and after we've rested, we wake up to a richer life in the world to come, in the world of the resurrection. So we know God has a purpose for the present, and we know he has a purpose for the future. Now, I'm living in a complicated story I don't fully understand, and so are you. Life is mysterious, but we're not meant to worry. The story has a good ending. And this will lead on to a better story, the new story which we don't even know yet, the story of our resurrection existence. And if you have that perspective, then failure doesn't seem so serious. Handicaps even don't seem so serious. We can accept our limitations and work and live within them because we have an inheritance, and that's stored up in heaven waiting to be revealed with Christ. And if you have that perspective, you are free. I've already said that our hope is for a free life in the future. The freedom of the glorious freedom of the sons and daughters of God. And that means, since we're free in the future, we have a kind of freedom now. Certainly we're free to fail without feeling ruined. We can cope with our constricted possibilities and our limited abilities. And with all of that, we can still make something of our lives that can please God and lead to a joyous future. So let's learn from that dear Scottish guy. I don't even know if he's still alive now, but I learned something from him, and that was early on. That was in my early months as a Christian, and it's a lesson that I'm still learning today. Well, God bless you and keep you, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.